My name is Margot, and am 32 years old, standing outside my childhood home in suburban Connecticut this Thanksgiving morning. My phone buzzed with a text from my mother that read, "We're only inviting you out of pity, so don't stay long." The November wind bit at my cheeks as I stared at those words, feeling the familiar ache of rejection settle into my bones like an old friend. But this time, something was different. This time, I smiled because tucked inside my coat pocket was an envelope that would change everything today, and they had no idea what was coming. Before we dive into what happened next, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop your city or country in the comments below. If you've ever felt like the black sheep in your family, hit that like button so I know I'm not alone. And please subscribe because this story gets wild, and you won't want to miss how karma finally caught up with the people who spent 30 years making me feel worthless. Trust me, what unfolds at this Thanksgiving dinner will restore your faith that truth always finds its way to the surface. Now, let's get into how this day became the moment I finally took my power back. Growing up, I was always invisible in my own family, overshadowed completely by my younger sister Claudine, who was 4 years behind me but somehow always miles ahead in my mother's heart. Claudine, now 28, had always been the golden child, the one our mother Bernadette paraded around like a trophy, showing off her supposedly superior looks, her charming personality, and eventually her marriage to wealthy Preston. My mother, Bernadette, at 58 years old, had perfected the art of favoritism into a weapon she wielded with surgical precision. My father, Roland, 61 and perpetually conflict-averse, simply watched it all happen from the sidelines, never once stepping in to defend me or balance the scales. My childhood was a catalogue of moments where my achievements vanished into thin air, while Claudine's mediocrity received standing ovations and celebrations that could be seen from space. I remembered with painful clarity the year I graduated high school with a full academic scholarship to Boston University, ranking third in my class of 400 students. My mother threw a party that weekend, but it wasn't for me. It was for Claudine, who had made the junior varsity cheerleading squad. I watched from the kitchen as relatives congratulated Claudine on her amazing accomplishment while my acceptance letter sat unopened on the counter for 3 days before my mother even acknowledged it with a distracted comment about how college would be good for me to mature. When I made Dean's List every semester, Bernadette would mention it in passing, if at all. But when Claudine got a B instead of her usual C in algebra, we had cake and my mother called everyone she knew. The message was clear, and it was consistent throughout my entire life. Claudine mattered and I was just taking up space in the family photo. The real breaking point came 5 years ago, a wound so deep that even now it made my chest tighten with remembered pain. I was engaged to Graham, a man I had dated for 3 years and loved with every fiber of my being. We had planned a beautiful spring wedding, sent out invitations, reserved the venue, and I had found the perfect dress that made me feel like maybe, just maybe, I deserved something beautiful. Then 2 weeks before the wedding, Graham called it off with a stammering phone call that made no sense, talking about how we weren't compatible and he had realized some things about our relationship. I was devastated, shattered into so many pieces I didn't know how to begin putting myself back together. But my family's reaction was even worse than the breakup itself. Instead of comfort, I received blame. Bernadette told everyone at what should have been my bridal shower, which she refused to cancel even after the engagement ended, that I had driven Graham away with my difficult personality and impossible expectations. She stood in front of 40 women and essentially told them my failed engagement was a character flaw, a confirmation of what she had always known, that I was fundamentally unlovable. 6 months of crying myself to sleep later, I discovered the truth through a mutual friend who could no longer keep the secret eating away at her conscience. Claudine had seduced Graham, pursuing him relentlessly at a charity gala I couldn't attend because of a work conference. She had told him elaborate lies about me, fabricated stories of infidelity and secret debts, painted me as an unstable manipulator who was only using him for financial security. Graham, susceptible to her attention and believing these lies from my own sister, had fallen into her trap. When I confronted my family with this information, with screenshots and witness statements, they closed ranks against me with a viciousness that still took my breath away. Bernadette called me jealous, delusional, and bitter. Claudine cried victim, claiming I was obsessed with ruining her happiness. Roland said nothing, as always, his silence the cruelest cut of all because it confirmed he would never choose me, even when I was clearly the one who had been wronged. The family uninvited me from gatherings for the next year, saying I was causing drama and my negative energy was ruining everyone's good time. After that, I moved to Boston and threw myself into building a career in financial consulting, working 80-hour weeks because working was easier than feeling. I climbed the corporate ladder with single-minded determination, each promotion a small victory against the voices in my head that sounded suspiciously like my mother telling me I would never amount to anything. Contact with my family dwindled to obligatory holiday texts that I sent out of some deeply ingrained sense of duty, always brief, always surface level, always leaving me feeling hollow. This Thanksgiving invitation had arrived 3 weeks ago, and unlike previous years, it hadn't even pretended to be warm. The message was clear in its cruelty, stating they would be gathering, and I could come if I really wanted to, but to remember that not everyone wanted me there. I had almost declined, almost sent back a polite excuse, and spent the holiday alone in my apartment with takeout and old movies. But then 3 days ago, I received a phone call that changed everything, and I knew I had to attend this Thanksgiving dinner because I had truths to deliver, and they were going to hear every single word. I stood on the front porch ringing the doorbell, watching through the frosted glass panel as shapes moved inside the warm, lit house. 7 minutes passed while I waited in the cold, my breath making little clouds in the November air, and I knew they could see me standing there. This was intentional, a small cruelty to remind me of my place before I even crossed the threshold. Finally, the door swung open and Claudine stood there in an expensive designer dress that probably cost more than my monthly rent, dripping with jewelry that caught the light, each piece a gift from Preston. Her greeting was ice-wrapped in a smile that never reached her eyes. "Oh, you actually came," she said, stepping aside with exaggerated slowness. "Mother said you'd probably chicken out at the last minute. She had a whole speech prepared about your unreliability." I stepped inside, refusing to give her the satisfaction of a reaction, keeping my voice pleasant and my expression neutral. The living room buzzed with family members, a collection of people who had watched me be mistreated for decades, and said nothing. Bernadette held court in her favorite armchair. Roland stood by the fireplace looking uncomfortable as always. Preston lounged on the sofa with a drink already in hand despite the early hour, and various relatives filled the spaces between, including Aunt Francine and Uncle Bernard and a handful of cousins whose names I barely remembered. Everyone turned to acknowledge Claudine's return with warm greetings and smiles, but when they noticed me trailing behind her, the warmth evaporated like morning dew under a harsh sun. A few people gave me curt nods, most simply looked away as if acknowledging my presence was too much effort to expend. Bernadette's face arranged itself into what she probably thought was a welcoming expression but looked more like someone forcing down spoiled food. "Margot, dear," she called out in a voice loud enough for the entire room to hear. "We saved you a seat." She gestured with theatrical flourish toward the corner near the kitchen door, a folding chair that looked like it had been pulled from the basement, positioned far from the main gathering area. The message was unmistakable. "You're here, but you don't really belong here." The first attack came within minutes, because Bernadette had never been one for subtlety when she could be cruel instead. "So, Margot," she announced to the entire room, her voice cutting through conversations like a knife. "Tell everyone about that little consulting thing you do. What exactly is it again?" Before I could answer, she turned to Claudine with a proud smile. Claudine was just made partner at Preston's father's firm. Such an incredible achievement at her age. The claim was an outright lie, and everyone in that room who paid attention knew it. Claudine didn't actually work. She had a vanity title on letterhead that allowed her to feel important while contributing nothing of substance. But Bernadette had always been more interested in appearance than truth. I responded calmly, refusing to be baited, mentioning that my work was going well and leaving it at that. Preston, already 3 drinks deep if his glassy eyes were any indication, smirked from his position on the sofa and made a condescending comment about people who actually have to work for a living instead of marrying well. And I watched Claudine's face flicker with something that might have been shame before she covered it with a practiced laugh. The attacks escalated as the afternoon wore on, each one designed to humiliate and diminish. Aunt Francine, always eager to curry favor with Bernadette, asked with false sweetness if I was seeing anyone special, and before I could respond, Bernadette jumped in with barely concealed glee. "Oh, you know Margot scares men away," she announced to the assembled relatives, her voice dripping with mock sympathy. "Remember poor Graham? He was smart enough to escape before he made a terrible mistake." The room fell into an uncomfortable silence. Everyone knowing the truth was far more complicated, but no one willing to contradict Bernadette's narrative. Claudine added her contribution with a sigh that was meant to sound sympathetic but came across as smug. "It's so sad that you never got over him, Margot. I mean, he and I had our moment, but that's water under the bridge now, right?" She looked at me with wide, innocent eyes, and I saw the calculation behind them, the deliberate twist of the knife she had planted in my back 5 years ago. The third attack came in the form of the cruelest truth wrapped in the pretense of inclusion. Bernadette stood up, glass in hand, and addressed the room as if making an important announcement that everyone needed to hear. "I want everyone to know that we only invited Margot here today because it's Thanksgiving and family obligation matters, even when it's difficult." She paused for effect, letting the words sink in while nervous laughter rippled through the room. "We told her not to stay long because, honestly, she brings such negative energy to gatherings, and it affects everyone's enjoyment." Relatives shifted uncomfortably, some finding sudden interest in their drinks or the pattern on the carpet, but none spoke up to defend me or question the cruelty of what was being said. I felt the familiar burn of humiliation in my chest, that old feeling of being small and worthless and wrong simply for existing. But then I remembered the envelope in my pocket, the phone call from 3 days ago, and the truth I was carrying into this house like a torch. I looked directly at my mother, let a small smile play at the corners of my mouth, and said in a voice that carried clearly through the room, "I appreciate the invitation, Bernadette. I won't stay long, but I'll stay long enough." The cryptic nature of my response made my mother's eyes narrow with suspicion, a flicker of unease crossing her face before she covered it with another sip of wine. During appetizers, while everyone pretended to enjoy Claudine's supposedly homemade dishes that still had catering labels hastily peeled off the containers in the kitchen, I positioned myself where I could observe Preston closely. He was already drunk, swaying slightly as he reached for his 4th drink before dinner had even started, and I watched the careful way Claudine monitored him, her smile tight and her eyes worried. When my young cousin Bethany, just 19 and home from her first semester of college, walked past carrying a tray of crackers, Preston made an inappropriate comment about how college must be treating her well while his gaze traveled over her body in a way that made everyone uncomfortable. Bethany's face flushed red and she hurried toward the kitchen, while Claudine forced an even brighter smile and changed the subject with desperate cheerfulness. I caught the moment between them, saw the crack in the perfect facade, and filed it away as confirmation of what I had begun to suspect. The golden couple was tarnished underneath all that shiny exterior. I excused myself to use the bathroom, walking down the familiar hallway, lined with family photos that tracked the progression of Bernadette's favoritism through the years, where Claudine's face appeared in every frame while mine grew increasingly scarce until it disappeared altogether. As I passed by my father's study, I heard voices engaged in a heated whispered argument, the kind where people are trying desperately to stay quiet while emotions threaten to betray them. I paused, recognizing Claudine and Preston's voices, and positioned myself where I could hear without being seen. Preston's voice was harsh and demanding despite his attempt at a whisper. "Your mother promised us that investment money, Claudine. Where the hell is it? We've been waiting for months." Claudine's response carried a tremor of desperation. "She's working on it, I promise. You need to stop pressuring me about this. It's complicated with the estate and the lawyers." Preston's bitter laugh was sharp enough to cut glass. "We're 3 months behind on the mortgage. The Porsche is getting repossessed next week. Do you understand what that means? We're going to lose everything. And you keep telling me to be patient." Claudine's voice broke slightly as she pleaded with him to keep his voice down, to remember that nobody could know about their financial troubles, to please just trust her that things would work out. I pressed my back against the wall, processing this information, the revelation that the perfect couple everyone envied was drowning in debt while desperately trying to keep up appearances. When I returned to the gathering, I found Bernadette cornering Roland in the kitchen, her voice low but intense, and I hung back behind the doorway to listen. "You need to transfer those bonds into my name only," she was saying with the tone of someone who expected immediate compliance. "I can't risk having Margot make claims on them later. She's vindictive enough to try." Roland's weak protest barely qualified as resistance. "But darling, those bonds were always meant to be split between both girls. That's what we agreed when we set them up." Bernadette's response was ice-cold steel. "Margot doesn't deserve anything from this family. She's been nothing but ungrateful and difficult her entire life. Everything should go to Claudine, who actually appreciates what we've done for her." I heard my father's soft sigh of defeat, the sound of a man who had spent decades choosing the path of least resistance rather than standing up for what was right, followed by his quiet agreement to do as she asked. My heart cracked a little wider, not with surprise because I had long ago stopped expecting anything from Roland, but with the confirmation that they were actively working to cut me out of anything I might be entitled to, erasing me from the family legacy one legal document at a time. Uncle Bernard, who had always been the family attorney and had handled legal matters for Bernadette for years, approached me with a wine glass in hand and an unsteady gait that suggested he had been overindulging. He sat down heavily in the chair next to mine and looked at me with rheumy eyes that held something that might have been regret or possibly just alcohol-induced sentimentality. "Such a shame about your grandmother's estate, Margot," he said, words slightly slurred at the edges. "Your mother certainly moved quickly on that matter after Lillian passed." I turned to look at him fully, my attention sharpening like a blade. "What do you mean, Uncle Bernard?" He blinked, seeming to realize he had said something he shouldn't have, and tried to backtrack with the clumsy obviousness of someone caught mid-confession. "Oh, nothing at all, just thinking out loud. You know how estates can be complicated." But I did know, because the pieces were falling into place with sickening clarity. My grandmother Lillian had died 8 months ago, and I had found it strange at the time that I hadn't been notified until after the funeral, hadn't been included in any discussions about her wishes or her belongings, hadn't even been given the opportunity to say goodbye. Bernadette must have hidden something from me, some inheritance or bequest that Lillian had intended for me to have, and she had moved quickly to make sure I never found out about it. The one bright moment in this minefield of a gathering came when young Bethany quietly slipped into the seat beside me, her eyes kind and her voice soft. "I don't think you're terrible at all," she said, glancing around to make sure no one was listening. "I think they're really mean to you, and it's not fair." Her words were simple, but they landed with the weight of validation I hadn't realized I was starving for, and I had to blink back unexpected tears. We talked quietly for a few minutes, and she mentioned struggling with college finances, worrying about loans and whether she could afford to continue her education. I made a mental note that this girl, this kind-hearted young woman who saw through the family's toxicity, deserved help that I was now in a position to provide. As we spoke, I felt Bernadette's eyes on us, her expression growing increasingly sour at seeing me connect with anyone in a positive way, and I knew another attack was coming soon. The tension in the room had been building steadily, Bernadette's comments growing sharper and more pointed with each passing hour. She made another show of looking at her watch and sighing dramatically. "Margot, don't you have somewhere else to be? Surely someone must need you somewhere, although I can't imagine who." The casual cruelty rolled off her tongue so easily, practiced over decades of similar cuts. I looked at my own watch, checking the time with deliberate slowness, and let my own mysterious smile play across my face. "Actually, yes. I'm expecting an important phone call at exactly 3 o'clock. It's regarding a legal matter that concerns this family." Bernadette's face went still, her wine glass frozen halfway to her lips, and I saw the first real flash of uncertainty in her eyes. "What legal matter?" she demanded, trying to sound authoritative but not quite managing to hide the tremor underneath. I simply shrugged, settling back in my chair with an ease I didn't entirely feel. "You'll find out soon enough." "We all will." The Thanksgiving table was set with Bernadette's finest china and crystal, an elaborate display that Claudine took full credit for despite the fact that we all knew she had ordered everything from an expensive catering company. The food was beautiful, arranged with professional precision, but the atmosphere was anything but appetizing as we took our assigned seats. I found myself positioned at the far end of the table, so distant from the main gathering that I was practically in a different room, separated by distance that was both physical and symbolic. The message was clear in its cruelty. I was here, but I was not really part of this family gathering, just an obligation to be endured and forgotten as quickly as possible. The toasts began with Bernadette standing at the head of the table, her glass raised and her face glowing with pride that had never, not once in 32 years, been directed at me. "To Claudine," she proclaimed in a voice that carried the weight of absolute conviction, "my pride and joy, the daughter who has made all the right choices in life." She paused, letting her gaze travel deliberately down the length of the table to where I sat isolated and alone, her meaning unmistakable to everyone present. "Some children bring you honor and make you proud to be their parent. Others, well, we don't discuss disappointments at the dinner table, do we?" Nervous laughter rippled around the table, relatives uncomfortable but unwilling to contradict her or come to my defense. I raised my water glass in a mock toast, took a deliberate sip, and pulled out my phone to check the time. 2:45. 15 minutes until everything changed. My smile must have unnerved Bernadette because she sat down quickly, her own smile faltering slightly. Preston, thoroughly drunk now and well past the point of maintaining any pretense of civility, decided this was the perfect moment to share what he clearly thought was a hilarious story. "You know what's funny?" he said loudly, waving a turkey leg like a conductor's baton. "I was just thinking about how Graham dodged a bullet when he called off that wedding." He pointed the turkey leg directly at me, gravy dripping onto the pristine tablecloth. "Can you imagine actually being married to, well, to that?" He gestured vaguely in my direction as if I were an object rather than a person. "Poor guy must thank his lucky stars every day that he escaped in time." The room fell into shocked silence. Even by this family's low standards, this was crossing a line, but Preston was too drunk to notice or care. Claudine made a show of scolding him, her voice carrying just enough reproach to seem appropriate while her eyes danced with barely concealed amusement. "Preston, that's not nice," she said, but she was smiling, and everyone could see it. Bernadette, never one to miss an opportunity to reinforce the narrative she had spent 5 years building, added her own contribution to the character assassination. "Well, Graham did see the real Margot eventually, and that's what matters," she said with the confidence of someone who believed her own lies. "He saw through all the pretense and recognized her for what she really is, unstable, paranoid, and frankly a bit unhinged." She took a sip of wine and delivered her final cut with surgical precision. Margot actually had the audacity to accuse her own sister of stealing Graham from her. Can you imagine the delusion? As if Claudine would ever need to steal anyone's man when she has men lining up for her attention. The implication hung in the air like poison gas. I was not only unlovable but also crazy for suggesting otherwise. I set down my fork with deliberate calm, the scrape of metal against china cutting through the toxic atmosphere like a bell. "Actually," I said, my voice clear and steady despite the rage building in my chest, "I have proof of exactly what happened between Claudine and Graham." I pulled out my phone, scrolling to a folder I had prepared specifically for this moment, my finger hovering over months of saved text messages and emails. Claudine's face drained of all color, her perfect makeup suddenly garish against her pale skin. Bernadette's hand shot out across the table, her voice rising to a sharp command. "We are not doing this at Thanksgiving dinner, Margot. This is exactly the kind of drama and negativity I was talking about." I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw the desperation behind the anger, the fear of losing control of the narrative she had worked so hard to construct. "You're absolutely right, Mother," I said, sliding my phone back into my pocket but keeping my hand on it like a promise. "Not yet, but soon, very soon." Preston lurched to his feet, the chair scraping loudly against the hardwood floor, his face flushed red with alcohol and anger. "Who the hell do you think you are, coming into this house and threatening people?" His voice was loud enough that neighbors might have heard through the walls. "You're nothing, Margot. You've always been nothing, and you'll always be nothing. The biggest mistake your parents ever made was not stopping with Claudine." The words were designed to destroy, to reduce me to tears or send me fleeing from the house in humiliation. But I had survived worse than Preston's drunken cruelty. I stood up slowly, matching his gaze with a calm that clearly unnerved him. "Sit down, Preston," I said quietly, my voice carrying more authority than his shouting ever could. "Your Porsche is being repossessed on Monday morning at 9:15. You might want to save your energy for dealing with that rather than attacking me." The silence that followed was absolute and crushing. Preston's face went from red to purple, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water, and I saw genuine fear flash in his eyes. What are you?" he stammered, but couldn't complete a coherent sentence. Claudine's foot shot out under the table, kicking my shin hard enough to bruise, her own panic evident in the violence of the gesture. My phone began ringing at exactly 3 o'clock, the sound cutting through the tension like a starting gun at a race. The caller ID showed my attorney's office. "Right on schedule." "Excuse me," I said, standing and walking toward the hallway with measured steps. "I really need to take this call." Bernadette's voice followed me, shrill with barely contained panic. "Margot, we are in the middle of Thanksgiving dinner. This is incredibly rude. You sit back down this instant." But I was already in the hallway, answering the phone, and the conversation lasted exactly 15 minutes while the entire family sat in painful silence, straining to hear what I was discussing but unable to make out the specific words. I could feel their anxiety building, could imagine Bernadette's fingers drumming against the table, Claudine's nervous glances at Preston, Roland's typical desire to disappear into the wallpaper. When I returned to the dining room, I was smiling wider than I had smiled in 5 years, genuine joy radiating from every pore because justice was finally arriving. I stood at my place at the far end of the table, all eyes fixed on me with varying degrees of dread and curiosity. "That was my attorney, Walter Morrison," I announced clearly, watching Bernadette's knuckles go white as she gripped her fork. "He had some very interesting news regarding grandmother Lillian's estate." The fork clattered from Bernadette's hand onto her plate, the sound sharp in the sudden silence. "Apparently, there was a second will that the family somehow failed to mention to me. A trust that grandmother Lillian established specifically and exclusively for me, held by an independent executor that you couldn't touch or manipulate. Bernadette." The words hung in the air like an explosion waiting to happen. "The trust is worth just over $800,000, plus a property in Vermont that I believe you've all been using quite frequently without my knowledge or permission." The room erupted into chaos, voices overlapping in shock and denial and accusation. But I just stood there smiling, finally holding all the cards. I pulled the envelope from my coat pocket, the one I had been carrying like a talisman since I arrived, and held it up for everyone to see. "This," I said, my voice cutting through the chaos, "is a letter from the independent executor of grandmother Lillian's trust, along with copies of correspondence that should have been delivered to me but were mysteriously intercepted." I looked directly at Bernadette, whose face had gone from red to ashen in the span of seconds. Hiding someone's mail, especially legal documents regarding an inheritance, is a federal crime. It's called mail fraud, and it carries serious penalties, including potential prison time. Uncle Bernard, who had sobered up considerably in the last few minutes, nodded slowly. "She's right, Bernadette. If you intercepted correspondence from an executor, you've committed a felony." Bernadette shot to her feet, her chair toppling backward with a crash that made everyone jump. "That money should go to Claudine," she screamed, all pretense of dignity abandoned. "You don't deserve a single penny of it. You've been nothing but ungrateful and difficult your entire life." I opened the envelope with deliberate slowness, pulling out a handwritten letter on cream-colored stationery that I recognized as my grandmother's favorite. "Let me read you something grandmother Lillian wrote to me before she died," I said, unfolding the pages with hands that trembled slightly despite my attempt at control. "To my dear Margot, the granddaughter who was never valued as she should have been. I have watched for 32 years as my daughter Bernadette treated you with a cruelty that breaks my heart. I have watched her shower Claudine with praise for nothing, while ignoring your genuine accomplishments. I have watched her gaslight you, diminish you, and try to break your spirit. This trust is my attempt to give you what she never did, recognition that you matter, that you are worthy, that you deserved so much better than what this family gave you." My voice cracked on the last words, the validation from beyond the grave hitting harder than I had expected. Bernadette lunged across the table trying to snatch the letter from my hands, but I pulled it back quickly, holding it against my chest like the precious thing it was. "Since we're sharing family truths today," I continued, pulling out my phone again, "let's talk about what really happened with Graham." I opened the folder of screenshots I had been collecting for 5 years, evidence that I had held onto like a security blanket, waiting for the right moment to use it. These are text messages between Claudine and Graham, starting 6 months before my wedding was supposed to happen. I began reading selected excerpts, my voice steady despite the pain each word reopened. From Claudine to Graham, "I can't stop thinking about you. She doesn't have to know." From Graham to Claudine, "This is wrong. She's your sister." From Claudine to Graham, "She's cheating on you. I've seen the messages. Am trying to protect you." I looked up at the shocked faces around the table. "Except I wasn't cheating." Claudine made up elaborate lies, created fake evidence, manipulated a man I loved into doubting me so completely that he called off our wedding. Preston, who had been staring at Claudine with growing horror, grabbed the phone from my hand to read the messages himself, scrolling through months of manipulation and deceit that his wife had carefully hidden from him. Preston's rage when he finally looked up from my phone was volcanic, a complete transformation from his earlier drunken belligerence into something far more dangerous. "You told me he pursued you," he said to Claudine, his voice low and shaking with fury. "You said you resisted, that you barely even spoke to him, that Margot was making up crazy stories because she was jealous of our happiness." Claudine was stammering, her usual smooth manipulation failing her in the face of undeniable evidence. "It wasn't like that. Those messages are taken out of context. She's twisting everything." But Preston had scrolled further, finding messages where Claudine bragged to a friend about stealing Margot's boring fiancé and laughing about how easy it had been to destroy me. "Our entire marriage is built on lies," Preston said, and I watched something break behind his eyes, the last thread of whatever had held them together, snapping cleanly. I turned to my father, who had been sitting silent and small throughout this entire revelation, and asked the question I already knew the answer to. "You knew, didn't you, Dad?" Roland looked up at me with tears streaming down his face, and I saw guilt written in every line of his expression. "I saw them together at the Riverside Hotel," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "2 months before your wedding. They were in the restaurant, holding hands, and when they saw me, Claudine begged me not to say anything. She promised it was just a moment of weakness, that it was over, that telling you would only hurt you unnecessarily." His voice broke completely. I chose to believe her because it was easier than confronting the truth. I chose protecting Claudine over protecting you, and I have regretted it every single day since. The admission hung in the air, and I felt the last fragile hope I had been holding for my father's redemption crumble into dust. "You let me be called crazy for 5 years," I said, my voice hollow. "You let them gaslight me. Let Bernadette uninvite me from family gatherings. Let me lose relationships and reputation. All because you were too cowardly to tell the truth." But I wasn't finished, because the truth was a dam that had finally broken, and everything was flooding out at once. "Let's talk about Preston and Claudine's finances," I said, pulling out a folder I had brought specifically for this purpose. "I hired a private investigator 3 months ago to look into some suspicious activity I had noticed." Preston's face went white. "You're $400,000 in debt, having borrowed against Preston's parents' business without their knowledge or permission. Preston, your father is currently working with prosecutors to press embezzlement charges against you. The Porsche repossession is just the beginning. You're going to lose the house, the cars, probably your freedom when the charges are filed next week." Claudine made a sound like a wounded animal, her perfect facade shattering completely. "The successful power couple that everyone envies. You're bankrupt and headed for criminal court." Bernadette tried one last desperate manipulation, her voice taking on the martyred tone she had perfected over decades. "How dare you come into this house and ruin Thanksgiving?" she cried, pressing a hand to her chest as if physically wounded. "I'm your mother. I gave birth to you. How can you be so cruel?" I looked at her, really looked at this woman who had spent 32 years systematically destroying my self-worth, and felt nothing but pity. "You want to talk about cruelty, Bernadette? Let's make a list. When I was 8 years old, and won the school spelling bee, you didn't come to the ceremony because Claudine had a dentist appointment. When I graduated summa cum laude from college, you left my graduation early to take Claudine shopping. When I got my first major promotion at work, you told me I was probably sleeping with my boss because you couldn't imagine me earning anything on merit." My voice was rising despite my attempts to stay calm. 32 years of suppressed pain finally finding its voice. You stole my inheritance, hid my grandmother's love from me, let my sister destroy my engagement, and called me mentally unstable when I tried to tell the truth. You didn't give me everything, Bernadette. You gave me nothing but pain and trauma and years of therapy trying to undo the damage you caused. Aunt Francine, who had been uncharacteristically quiet during these revelations, tried to insert herself as Bernadette's defender, her voice taking on a pleading quality. Margot, your mother did her best. You need to show some respect and gratitude. I turned to look at her, this woman who had enabled Bernadette's abuse for decades. Uncle Bernard already told me that you helped Bernadette hide the executor's letters. Aunt Francine. He mentioned that Bernadette promised you a cut of my inheritance if you helped her make sure I never found out about it. Francine's face flushed crimson and she started to deny it. But Bernard spoke up from across the table, his voice heavy with regret. It's true, I saw the agreement. Bernadette was going to give Francine $50,000 from Margot's trust fund in exchange for intercepting and destroying any mail from the executor. The family's attention turned on Francine with shock and disgust, and I watched her realize that her own greed had cost her the family's respect. Claudine's breakdown was spectacular in its completeness, all the polish and poise she had cultivated over 28 years cracking apart like cheap plaster. She launched herself toward me, screaming incoherently, her perfectly manicured hands reaching for my face like claws. You've always been jealous of me. You've always wanted what I have. You can't stand that I'm prettier, more successful, more loved. Preston caught her arm and pulled her back, but there was no gentleness in the gesture, his grip hard enough to leave marks. Let me go, Claudine shrieked at him, trying to wrench free. Don't you see what she's doing? She's trying to destroy our family because she's bitter and alone. I laughed. I actually laughed, because the absurdity of her accusations in the face of everything that had been revealed was almost too much to process. Jealous of what exactly, Claudine? Your failing marriage? Your mountain of debt? The fact that you're so empty inside that you had to steal my fiancé to feel like you had value? I'm not jealous of you. I pity you. The mention of Graham struck a nerve, and I decided to twist the knife one more time because she deserved to know how little her victory had actually meant. You know, Graham reached out to me last year, right? I said casually, watching her face freeze in shock. The room went deadly silent, everyone's attention fixed on this new revelation. He apologized, said had realized within weeks of our broken engagement that you had manipulated him, but by then the damage was done and he was too embarrassed to admit had been played. I pulled out my phone again and scrolled to the email I had saved. Let me read you a part of his apology. Claudine became obsessed after we broke up. She called me constantly, showed up at my apartment uninvited, sent hundreds of texts. I made the mistake of dating her for 6 months, trying to convince myself that my feelings for her were real. But honestly, she was suffocating and manipulative, and I eventually had to block her number to get her to leave me alone. Claudine's face had gone from red to white to a sickly gray color. Your great prize, the man you destroyed my life to steal, didn't even want you in the end. He called you suffocating and manipulative. And he ran away from you just like I'm sure Preston is going to do now that he knows the truth. Preston, still drunk but now powered by rage rather than mellowness, turned on Claudine with a viciousness that shocked even me. I never loved you, he said, each word delivered like a physical blow. I want you to know that, to really understand it. I married you because your mother promised me money and business connections that would set me up for life. Claudine made a wounded sound, reaching for him, but he stepped back as if her touch might contaminate him. You're shallow, boring, and honestly not even that attractive without all the professional makeup and expensive clothes hiding the real you. His words were cruel, but there was a terrible honesty to them, stripping away the last pretenses of their relationship. He turned his fury on Bernadette next, pointing an accusing finger at her. You promised us investments, connections, a trust fund from your mother that would solve all our problems. Where is it, Bernadette? Where's all this family wealth you kept dangling like a carrot? I took this opportunity to drop another revelation, because the truth was flowing now and I wasn't going to hold anything back. Speaking of family wealth, I said, drawing everyone's attention back to me, let's talk about that Vermont property that grandmother Lillian left specifically to me in her trust. Bernadette's eyes went wide with panic. The beautiful lake house that we've all been using for family vacations. The one that Bernadette has been renting out to tourists for extra income? That property belongs to me, has belonged to me for the 8 months since grandmother died, and Bernadette has been illegally claiming ownership of it. I pulled out another document from my folder. I have rental income records showing that Bernadette has collected over $40,000 in rental fees for a property she doesn't own. That's theft, fraud, and probably a few other crimes that my attorney is currently cataloging. I looked at my mother, this woman who had birthed me but never mothered me. I'm taking possession of the lake house next month. You're all being evicted, and every penny you made from renting my property is being returned to me with interest. Bernadette's last weapon was the threat of legal action, the one card she thought she still held. I'll contest the will, she screamed, her voice raw and desperate. I'll tie this up in court for years. You'll spend every penny of that inheritance on legal fees and never see a dime of it. I had been waiting for this exact threat, had prepared for it with the thoroughness that had made me successful in my career. You can try, I said calmly, sitting back down in my chair with the relaxed posture of someone who held all the winning cards. But my attorney, who specializes in estate law and has handled cases like this dozens of times, says that hiding correspondence from an executor is a federal crime that carries up to 5 years in prison and substantial fines. I let that sink in before continuing. Even if you somehow managed to tie up the inheritance, you'd spend every cent you have on legal fees, and at the end of it, you'd likely still go to jail for mail fraud. Is it really worth it? Uncle Bernard, despite his earlier complicity, had enough legal knowledge to know I was right. She's correct, Bernadette. The evidence of mail fraud is clear, and federal prosecutors take these cases very seriously. You'd be facing criminal charges while also fighting a civil case you have almost no chance of winning. Roland made his pathetic attempt at reconciliation, approaching me with tears streaming down his face and his hands held out in supplication like a beggar asking for mercy. Margot, sweetheart, can we please talk privately? Father to daughter, away from all this chaos. His voice was thick with emotion, but I could see the calculation behind it, the way he was already trying to align himself with the daughter who suddenly had money and power. You want a relationship now? I asked, my voice flat and cold. Now that I have $800,000 in property, where was this desire for father-daughter bonding when Bernadette was telling everyone I was mentally unstable? Where were you when Claudine was stealing my fiancé and I needed someone to believe me? Roland opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out, because we both knew there was no good answer to those questions. It's too late, Dad. You had 32 years to be my father, to protect me, to choose me even once. And you never did. You don't get to suddenly develop paternal feelings now that it's financially convenient. The younger cousins who had been silent throughout most of this dinner were processing the revelations in real time, their illusions about the perfect family shattering before their eyes. Bethany approached me quietly, her voice almost a whisper. I always knew they treated you differently, but I didn't realize how bad it was. I'm so sorry I never said anything. I touched her arm gently, appreciating the sentiment even if it came too late. Another cousin, Geneva, who was just 23 and had always seemed oblivious to family dynamics, admitted that she had noticed the favoritism growing up but had been told by Bernadette that I was sensitive and imagined slights that didn't exist. I should have trusted my own eyes instead of letting her gaslight me too, Geneva said, and I could see genuine regret in her face. Some family members were apologizing, trying to distance themselves from Bernadette's cruelty now that the truth was out, but I was selective about whose apologies I accepted because words were cheap and actions over decades spoke louder. Bernadette's final meltdown was the culmination of a lifetime of needing to control everyone and everything around her. She swept her arm across the dining table, sending dishes and glasses crashing to the floor in an explosion of broken china and spilled food. "You're destroying this family," she screamed at me, her voice hoarse and wild. "Everything I've built, everything I've worked for, you're tearing it all down because you're spiteful and vindictive." I stood up slowly, looking at this woman who had given birth to me but had never truly seen me as anything more than a disappointment. "I didn't destroy this family, Bernadette. You destroyed it 32 years ago when you decided that one daughter was worth loving and the other was worth tormenting. You destroyed it every time you chose Claudine over me, every time you diminished my achievements, every time you made me feel like I was worthless. This family was broken long before I walked through that door today. I'm just finally telling the truth about it." Bernadette collapsed into her chair, sobbing with harsh, gasping breaths, and I waited for someone to comfort her, but no one moved. Even her most loyal supporters had been shaken by the revelations, and they were seeing her clearly for perhaps the first time. Standing in the wreckage of what had once been a Thanksgiving dinner, surrounded by the remnants of a family that had never really been whole, I felt a strange sense of power and hollowness combined. The scapegoat had become the victor, the forgotten daughter had risen up with truth and evidence and the law on her side. Everyone who had hurt me was facing consequences. Bernadette's reputation destroyed, Claudine's marriage crumbling, Preston facing criminal charges, Francine exposed as complicit in fraud. But victory felt different than I had imagined during all those years when I fantasized about this moment. It didn't heal the old wounds or erase the decades of pain. It just confirmed what I had always known deep down. They had been wrong about me, and I had been strong enough to survive them. Claudine cornered me in the kitchen while I was getting a glass of water. Her mascara streaked down her face and her designer dress rumpled from her earlier outburst. "Please," she said, and for the first time in my life I heard genuine desperation rather than manipulation in her voice. "Please don't take Preston from me. I know I messed up, I know I've done terrible things, but I have nothing without him." I turned to look at her, really look at her, this woman who had tormented me our entire lives. "I didn't take Preston from you, Claudine. Your lies did that all by themselves. I just brought the truth into the light." She grabbed my arm, her perfectly manicured nails digging into my skin. "I was jealous," she admitted, the words tumbling out in a rush. "You were always smarter than me, more accomplished, more driven. Mom loved me, but she respected you, and I hated that. I hated that no matter how much attention she gave me, she still looked at you with this expression like you were capable of things I could never achieve." This was perhaps the first completely honest thing Claudine had said to me in years, and I felt a flicker of something that might have been pity. "So you decided to destroy me instead of dealing with your own insecurity." Claudine's confession continued, each revelation worse than the last. "I sabotaged you more than you know," she said, her voice breaking. "Those job applications you sent out right after college, the ones where you got rejected from companies you were overqualified for. I called them, pretending to be a reference from your university, and I told them you had academic integrity issues and interpersonal problems." My breath caught in my throat. Memories of that frustrating year when doors kept closing for no apparent reason suddenly making terrible sense. "I spread rumors about you in town, told people you were unstable and difficult, turned family friends against you before you even knew they were being poisoned against you. She was crying openly now, tears and snot mixing with her expensive makeup. I wanted to be the successful one, the only one, and I was willing to do anything to make that happen. I'm a terrible person, Margot. I know that now. I've always known it, but I kept doing it anyway. Uncle Bernard found me on the back porch where I had escaped for a moment of fresh air, and he sat down heavily on the step beside me. Your grandmother knew, he said without preamble. Lillian documented everything, kept records of every cruel comment Bernadette made, every time she favored Claudine over you, every achievement of yours that got ignored. He pulled out an old leather folder from inside his jacket. She gave this to me 6 months before she died and made me promise to give it to you if Bernadette tried to hide the inheritance. Inside were photographs spanning decades, letters Lillian had written but never sent. A meticulous record of a grandmother watching her granddaughter being emotionally abused and feeling powerless to stop it. She wanted you to know that someone saw it, someone witnessed what they did to you, and someone thought it was wrong. Bernard's voice was heavy with his own guilt. I should have given this to you sooner, but I was afraid of your mother's reaction. I'm a coward, just like your father. I looked at this man who had stayed silent while I suffered, and I accepted the folder because I needed that validation, that proof that I hadn't imagined or exaggerated the abuse, but I couldn't absolve him of his complicity. Preston approached me with the desperate energy of a drowning man reaching for a life raft. All his earlier arrogance stripped away by the reality of his crumbling life. I need you to loan me money, he said without any attempt at pride or dignity. Just $50,000 to save the house, to give us time to figure things out. I'll pay you back with interest, I swear. I looked at him, this man who had called me nothing just hours earlier, who had mocked my failed engagement, and made me feel small in front of the entire family. Why would I help you, Preston? He stammered, trying to find words that might convince me. I was drunk. I didn't mean those things I said at dinner. I was just trying to impress Claudine's family. You know how it is. The excuses fell flat and pathetic. You meant every word, I said calmly. You looked me in the eye and called me nothing, treated me like garbage, and now you want me to save you from the consequences of your own criminal actions. The answer is no, Preston. You're going to have to face what you've done without my money cushioning your fall. My father found me alone on the back porch as the sun began to set, the sky painted in oranges and purples that would have been beautiful if the day hadn't been so emotionally devastating. Roland's tears were genuine this time. Not the calculated crying he sometimes employed to avoid conflict, but real grief and regret. I failed you, he said simply. I was a coward who chose the easy path instead of protecting my daughter, and I failed you in every way that matters. He sat down without asking permission, his body language defeated. Your mother threatened to divorce me if I ever took your side over Claudine's. She said she would take everything, ruin me socially and financially, make sure I lost access to both my daughters. I chose comfort and security over doing what was right. The explanation didn't excuse anything, but at least it was honest. I don't expect your forgiveness, he continued. I don't deserve it. I just wanted you to know that I see it now. I see how badly I let you down. And am sorry doesn't begin to cover the debt I owe you. I looked at this man who was supposed to have been my protector and felt a bittersweet acceptance wash over me. You're right, Dad. I don't forgive you. But I understand that you were trapped in your own way. And I accept your apology even if I can't absolve you. Back inside, curious family members were asking what I planned to do with the inheritance, and I took the opportunity to make my intentions clear. I'm not giving a penny to Bernadette or Claudine, I announced to the room. The money is going to be used exactly as grandmother Lillian intended, to build a life free from this family's toxicity. I outlined my plans. A scholarship fund in Lillian's name for young women from dysfunctional families, financial help for Bethany's college education, donations to causes my grandmother had cared about, and using the rest to build the life I deserved. This money is going to do good in the world, help people who need it, and honor the woman who saw my worth when my own mother couldn't. Bernadette recovered slightly from her breakdown, tried one more manipulation. A real daughter would share with her family, she said, her voice taking on that martyred tone again. You're being cruel and selfish, hoarding money while your own sister is struggling. I looked at her and smiled sadly. A real mother would have loved both daughters equally. You taught me to protect myself and look out for my own interests above all else. I'm just following the example you set for 32 years. I made my announcement standing in the center of the destroyed dining room, broken china crunching under my feet. I'm leaving now, I said clearly. I came here today because I needed to face all of you one last time, to let you see that I survived you, that I thrived despite your best efforts to break me. I wanted you to know that I succeeded not because of this family but despite this family. I looked at each person in turn. Bernadette with her ruined makeup and shattered control, Claudine sobbing on the couch, Preston staring into his empty glass, Roland looking broken and old, the relatives who had watched and said nothing. This is the last Thanksgiving we will ever spend together. I'm cutting off all contact, changing my phone number, and you will not have my new address. If you try to reach me, I will not respond. I'm done with all of you. I gathered my coat from the hall closet, that same coat with the envelope that had started this whole revelation, and walked back into the living room where my family sat in various states of devastation. Bethany jumped up and hugged me tightly, whispering thank you against my shoulder, and I hugged her back with genuine affection. Geneva approached more hesitantly and asked for my contact information, and after a moment's consideration I gave it to her, because she was young enough that maybe she could learn from this and build something better. But I was selective, very selective, about who got a second chance to know me. Bernadette blocked the front door with her body, one last desperate attempt to control the situation. You can't just leave like this, she cried, her voice hoarse from screaming. What will people think? What will I tell the neighbors, our friends, the people at church? Even now, even after everything, she was worried about appearances rather than actual relationships. Tell them the truth, I said, my voice steady and calm. Tell them you lost a daughter because you never valued her, because you chose favoritism and cruelty over love and fairness. Or make up whatever story makes you feel better. I don't care anymore what you tell people, because I won't be here to hear it. I pushed past her, not roughly but firmly, and she stumbled aside. Claudine came running after me as I walked down the driveway toward my car, her heels clicking frantically on the pavement, her voice desperate and broken. We're sisters, she screamed after me. Blood. Family. You can't just abandon me like this. I stopped and turned to face her one last time, this woman who had tormented me our entire lives. You abandoned me first, I said quietly, when you stole Graham, when you let Mom torture me and said nothing, when you chose to be the favorite instead of being my sister. You made your choice decades ago, Claudine. I'm just finally making mine. She collapsed onto the lawn, her sobs echoing through the quiet suburban street, and I could see neighbors peeking through curtains at the spectacle. The perfect family's facade was shattered for everyone to see, and I felt no guilt about that. Before I got in my car, I shared one final piece of information that I had been holding back. I'm moving to Colorado, I announced to Claudine and to Bernadette, who had followed us outside. I accepted a VP position at a major consulting firm in Denver. I start in 3 weeks. I'll be changing my phone number, and you will not have a forwarding address. This is goodbye, and it's permanent. Claudine's face crumpled further, the reality of losing me completely finally sinking in. As if on cue, Preston's phone rang inside the house, and through the open door I could hear him answer it. His face went white and then red, and when he hung up he looked like he might vomit. "That was my father," he called out, his voice carrying to where we stood in the driveway. "Hez, officially pressing embezzlement charges. I need to turn myself into the police by Monday morning." Claudine's perfect life was demolished, every piece of it crumbling like a house made of cards in a strong wind. I sat in my car for a moment before starting the engine, pulling out the full letter from grandmother Lillian that I hadn't yet read completely. Her handwriting was shaky but clear, and her words broke my heart even as they healed something deep inside. "You deserved a mother who saw your worth, who celebrated your victories, who protected you from harm." Bernadette was incapable of being that mother, damaged by her own narcissism and insecurity. "I'm sorry, I didn't intervene more forcefully when I was alive. I hope this inheritance helps you build the life you deserve, far away from the people who couldn't appreciate the remarkable woman you became." I cried, sitting alone in my car, tears of grief and relief and gratitude for a grandmother who had seen me when no one else would. Uncle Bernard knocked on my car window, and I rolled it down cautiously. He handed me a thick envelope, additional documents that my grandmother had left with him. Photos, letters, documentation of everything Bernadette did over the decades. "Your grandmother wanted you to have the whole truth, evidence that you weren't crazy or oversensitive, that it really happened the way you remember it." His voice was thick with emotion. "I'm sorry I didn't give these to you sooner. I was afraid of Bernadette, afraid of causing family conflict, and that fear made me complicit in your abuse." I took the envelope and thanked him, genuinely grateful even though his apology came far too late to undo the damage. I looked at my childhood home one final time, that white colonial with the blue shutters that held so many painful memories. I remembered being 8 years old and crying in my room because I won the spelling bee but nobody came to watch. I remembered being 16 and getting my driver's license a week before Claudine and being told to stop showing off when I mentioned it. I remembered every small cruelty, every dismissal, every moment of being made to feel invisible and worthless. But I also remembered the strength I had developed, the resilience that had been forged in that crucible of rejection. "Goodbye," I whispered to the house, to the past, to the girl I had been who thought if she just tried harder she might finally be good enough. That girl was gone now, replaced by a woman who knew her worth regardless of their inability to see it. As I drove away from that house, the sun setting behind me, and the future stretching out ahead, I didn't look in the rearview mirror. Bernadette was standing in the doorway looking small and defeated. Claudine was still on the lawn with her mascara streaking down her face, and Roland watched from an upstairs window with the broken expression of a man who had failed at the most important job he would ever have. I kept my eyes forward, moving toward the life I had built through sheer determination despite everything they had done to stop me. I called my attorney Walter Morrison as I merged onto the highway, confirming that all the legal paperwork was in order. "The restraining order has been filed," he confirmed. "If any of them try to contact you, it will be a violation with legal consequences. The trust fund transfer is finalized, the Vermont property deed is being processed, and I've documented all the evidence of mail fraud in case Bernadette tries to contest anything." I thanked him for believing me when I had first approached him 6 months ago with my suspicions about the hidden inheritance. "You did excellent detective work," he said. "Most people wouldn't have pursued it the way you did. You should be proud of yourself." And for the first time in a very long time, I was proud. The realization washed over me as I drove through the darkening evening that I had spent years waiting for this moment, fantasizing about the day when I would finally confront them with the truth and watch their world crumble. I had thought revenge would feel sweet, that vindication would heal the wounds they had inflicted. Instead, I just felt tired and sad but also profoundly free. The family I had wanted, The mother who would love me unconditionally and the sister who would be my best friend had never existed. They were fantasies I had clung to despite overwhelming evidence that these people were incapable of giving me what I needed. It was time to let go of what should have been and embrace what actually was: my freedom, my future, my chosen family. My phone buzzed with a text from my friend Lorraine in Boston, someone I had met through work who had become closer to me than any blood relative. "How did it go?" she asked. "Do you need me to come over tonight?" Another text came from a colleague congratulating me on the VP position in Denver. Then Bethany sent a message: "You're my hero. Thank you for showing me that I don't have to accept being treated badly just because someone is family." These were my people, the family I had chosen and who had chosen me back, and they were worth more than any biological connection. 6 months later, I stood in my beautiful apartment in the Cherry Creek neighborhood of Denver, looking out at the Rocky Mountains in the distance and marveling at how much my life had transformed. The VP position at the consulting firm had exceeded all my expectations. I was leading a team of 20 talented consultants and making more money than I had ever dreamed possible. My apartment was filled with light and plants and books, decorated in a way that reflected my tastes rather than trying to please anyone else. And I was dating someone kind, a high school teacher named Fletcher who was gentle and patient and showed me what healthy love looked like after a lifetime of dysfunction. The therapy journey had been essential to my healing. Sitting in that comfortable office twice a week talking to Dr. Martinez about narcissistic family dynamics and generational trauma. She helped me understand that I had been assigned the role of scapegoat while Claudine was the golden child, and that nothing I could have done would have changed Bernadette's need to have one daughter to worship and one to diminish. "It was never about your worth, Doctor," Martinez explained during one particularly breakthrough session. "It was about her pathology, her need for control and her inability to love both children equally. You could have been perfect and she still would have found reasons to criticize you because the problem was in her, not in you." Those words were medicine to wounds I had carried for decades. Building my chosen family had been one of the most healing parts of this journey. My friendship with Lorraine had deepened into the kind of sisterhood I had always wanted, where we supported each other's victories and held space for each other's struggles. I joined a book club with neighbors and volunteered at a women's shelter, helping other women escape toxic family situations. Bethany video called me every week, thriving in college on the scholarship I had funded for her, and I felt pride in helping this young woman build a better life. These connections, based on mutual respect and genuine care, were teaching me what family was supposed to feel like. The Lillian Henderson Memorial Scholarship Fund launched in March, and standing on stage at the awards ceremony telling my story to a room full of young women was terrifying and liberating in equal measure. 12 scholarships were awarded that first year to young women from dysfunctional families who were pursuing education despite obstacles. I saw myself in every one of their faces. That determination to succeed despite the voices telling them they weren't good enough. "You are worthy," I told them. "Not because of what you achieve or accomplish, but simply because you exist." The people who couldn't see that were blind, but that blindness was their failing, not yours. Geneva occasionally updated me about the family despite my requests that she not share, unable to resist the temptation to gossip about the dramatic fallout. Claudine and Preston's divorce had been bitter and ugly, a public spectacle that destroyed what remained of their social standing. Preston had served 6 months in jail for embezzlement and was now working at a car dealership, his family having disowned him completely. Claudine had moved back in with Bernadette, 2 toxic people trapped in that house together, feeding off each other's bitterness. Roland had moved to Florida, maintaining minimal contact with anyone, living out his retirement in isolation that was probably what he had always wanted. Bernadette told everyone who would listen that I was ungrateful and estranged, painting herself as the victim of an ungrateful daughter. But fewer people believed her version of events after the truth had come out. The moment of true forgiveness came not through forgiving what they had done, because some actions didn't deserve forgiveness, but through forgiving myself. I had spent so many years thinking if I had just tried harder, been better, achieved more, then maybe they would have loved me. In therapy, I learned to release that guilt, to understand that their inability to love me appropriately was never my responsibility to fix. I stopped carrying the weight of their failures and accepted that I deserved better than what they had given me. This self-forgiveness was more powerful than any apology they could have offered. As a therapeutic exercise, Dr. Martinez had me write a letter to Bernadette that I would never send, pouring out 32 years of hurt and anger and grief onto paper. I wrote about being 8 years old and feeling invisible, about watching Claudine get celebrated for mediocrity while my excellence was ignored, about the systematic destruction of my self-worth over decades. The letter ended with these words: I release you, not because you deserve forgiveness, but because I deserve peace. I'm letting go of the hope that you will ever be the mother I needed, and I'm choosing to mother myself with the kindness you never showed me. I burned that letter in my fireplace, watching the pages curl and blacken, and felt something heavy lift from my chest. The Vermont property, that beautiful lake house filled with complicated memories, became Lillian's haven, a retreat center for women healing from family trauma. I renovated it carefully, keeping the parts that honored my grandmother's memory while transforming it into a space of healing and hope. Women came for weekends or weeks, participating in therapy groups and healing workshops, finding community with others who understood the unique pain of family rejection. Turning my inheritance into something that helped others felt like the best possible way to honor Lillian's legacy and my own journey. Bethany visited Denver during her spring break, and we spent a wonderful week hiking and talking and building the healthy family relationship we both deserved. You showed me that I don't have to accept crumbs of love, she told me as we sat on my balcony watching the sunset. I went no contact with Bernadette and Claudine too. They were starting to treat me the way they treated you, and I decided I was worth more than that. I felt fierce pride in this young woman who was breaking generational cycles, who was choosing herself over toxic family bonds. My relationship with Fletcher deepened slowly and healthily, so different from the intense, anxious attachments of my past. He came from a loving family and showed me through his interactions with his parents and siblings what functional family dynamics looked like. He was patient with my trust issues, understanding when I pulled back emotionally, consistent in his affection without being overwhelming. You're not broken, he told me one night when I apologized for my emotional walls. You're incredibly strong. You survived a war zone and came out the other side. Those scars are proof of your strength, not evidence of damage. Professional success felt sweet in a way I hadn't expected, not just because of the money and prestige, but because it was undeniable proof that everything my family had said about me was wrong. The promotion to senior VP came with a corner office and the respect of colleagues who valued my contributions. Everything Bernadette had told me I would never achieve, I had achieved and surpassed. Success was the best revenge, but it was also the best healing, concrete evidence that I was capable and worthy regardless of their opinions. An unexpected letter arrived from Roland in May, forwarded through my attorney since he didn't have my address. It was pages long, a detailed apology that took full accountability for his failures without asking for anything in return. He acknowledged every moment he should have protected me and didn't, every time he chose silence over defending me, every instance where his cowardice had enabled my abuse. I don't expect you to respond to this letter, he wrote. I'm not asking for a relationship or forgiveness. I just need you to know that I see clearly now what I should have seen then. And I carry the weight of my failures every day. I read the letter twice, felt sadness for him and for what could have been, but I didn't respond. Some bridges, once burned, cannot and should not be rebuilt. I started keeping a gratitude journal at Dr. Martinez's suggestion, writing down 3 things each day that I was thankful for. I was grateful for my escape, for the strength that had carried me through, for my chosen family, and my career, and my apartment with its mountain views. I was even grateful, in a complicated way, for the pain because it had taught me resilience and shown me what I was capable of surviving. I wouldn't be who I am without surviving who they were. I wrote one night, it wasn't about being thankful for the abuse, but about acknowledging that the person I had become, strong and independent and self-aware, had been forged in that difficult fire. The life lesson that crystallized over these months of healing was fundamental and important enough that I wanted to share it. Family doesn't mean unconditional acceptance of abuse. Blood relation doesn't require loyalty to toxicity. Walking away from people who hurt you isn't giving up or being weak. It's choosing yourself and your well-being over maintaining a false peace. Healing is possible even after decades of damage. Though it requires work and time and often professional help, you can build a better family through choice than the one you were given by biology. Surrounding yourself with people who see your worth and treat you accordingly. The deeper truth I learned was that some families are simply incapable of healthy love, not because the children are unlovable, but because the parents are unable to see value beyond their own needs and pathologies. Recognizing this reality isn't defeat. It's liberation. It frees you from the endless cycle of trying to earn love from people who aren't capable of giving it, and it allows you to seek that love from people who can. If I could give advice to others in similar situations, it would be this. If you're the scapegoat in your family, understand that it was never about you, and it never will be. Document everything because truth matters. Even when people try to gaslight you into doubting your own experiences. Build financial independence because freedom requires resources. Find your people because they do exist, even if your biological family isn't them. Therapy isn't weakness, it's wisdom and one of the best investments you can make in yourself. No contact is a valid and sometimes necessary choice. You owe your abusers nothing. Not even forgiveness if you're not ready to give it. The final scene of my healing journey came on a quiet evening in October, standing on my balcony as the sun set over the Denver skyline, painting everything in shades of gold and purple. My phone rang with a call from a number I didn't recognize, and when I checked the caller ID, I realized Bernadette had somehow gotten my new number. I looked at that incoming call, at my mother's name on the screen, and I felt nothing. No anxiety, no guilt, no obligation to answer. I smiled, declined the call, and blocked the number immediately. I don't owe you anything anymore, I said out loud to the empty air. The sense of freedom in that moment was absolute and perfect. Looking back on that Thanksgiving dinner 6 months ago, I understood now why I had smiled when I received that cruel invitation. I had smiled because I knew my freedom was coming, that the truth I carried would finally be spoken, that the power dynamic was about to shift permanently. They had said I would never amount to anything without them, that I needed their approval and acceptance to have value. But I had proved them spectacularly wrong. I amounted to everything precisely because I left them behind. The best revenge wasn't hurting them back or making them suffer. It was living so well that they became completely irrelevant to my joy. So let me ask you something. Have you ever had to walk away from toxic family members to save yourself? Do you think blood relation obligates you to maintain relationships that harm you? Drop your thoughts in the comments below because I would love to hear your stories and perspectives. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and let me know. I'm not alone in this experience. Subscribe to this channel for more stories about overcoming family trauma and building better lives. And share this video with someone who might need to hear that they're not crazy, they're not the problem, and they deserve so much better than what toxic family members have given them. Thank you for listening to my story, for witnessing my journey, and for being part of this community of survivors and thrivers. I'm sending you all strength, healing, and the courage to choose yourself, even when it's hard. May you find your freedom, your peace, and your chosen family. You are worthy of love, and you deserve to be treated with kindness and respect. Never forget that.